My son died while I sat less than 3 feet from his crib. I start with that because people always try to move the blame somewhere softer onto sickness, onto chance, onto anything that doesn't have my face. But the night I'm about to describe had a witness who cannot be argued with. The yellow bulb above the dresser, still burning when everything went wrong. Veden was born 2 days before the first cold front of October. The afternoon rain had turned the road to mud, and the wind carried the smell of wet corn husks through the open windows of the clinic. Mara's hands trembled when the midwife placed our son against her chest. He was small, red, and loud, but the sound felt like proof. I remember thinking that if he could scream like that, nothing could take him. We lived on the edge of a town that tourists never visit, a cluster of houses and tin roofs surrounded by fields. I worked wherever I could, pouring foundations, mixing cement, hauling blocks. Mara sold tamales at the market on Sundays. We were not superstitious people in the way outsiders imagine. We had phones, we had electricity, we knew the names of medicines, but we also had older rules that didn't disappear just because the world got louder. When we carried Ifevan into our house, the neighbors came as if the news had been rung like a bell. They brought broth, diapers, and the kind of advice you can't return to the shelf once it's offered. The women didn't crowd the baby with kisses. They stood at the doorway and looked past him, into the corners, as if checking whether something had followed us in. Dua Letty, who had been born in this town and planned to die in it, caught my sleeve before I could close the door. Her fingers were warm and dry, smelling faintly of lime and smoke. "Daniel," she said, low enough that Mora wouldn't hear, "tonight you latch the baby's window, not close latch." I tried to laugh. "We always latch. It's cold." Her eyes didn't soften. "Cold doesn't matter to them. Hunger does. Them," she jerked her chin toward the roofline. "The Brujas. They don't come walking like women. They come like guajolotes, big ones, quiet ones." Behind me, Mara froze at the word Brujas as if it had a hook in it. Her grandmother had filled her childhood with warnings about witches who slipped through the smallest mistakes. I had heard the same stories, but I wore them the way you wear the smell of your town familiar, ignorable, not something you invite into your home. In the kitchen, the older women spoke with the hard confidence of people repeating what they had survived. They said a bruja could take the shape of a turkey so it could stand under a roof without being questioned. They said it returned night after night once it sensed a newborn in the house. They said it didn't need to break anything. It waited for fatigue. It waited for a hand that forgot to check a latch. Mara listened, as if the words were nails being driven into her chest. When the women left, she checked every window and door again, tugging on curtains until the fabric puckered. "You're letting them scare you," I told her. "Babies cry, babies get fevers. That's real." "And what if this is real too?" she shot back, voice thin. "What if the rules exist because someone learned them the hard way?" To keep the peace, I let her set the protections the neighbors insisted on. She took an old pair of sewing scissors, opened them wide, and laid them by the crib so the blades formed a cross. Dua Letty returned before sunset with holy water in a recycled perfume vial and told Maria to place it where it could watch. It was absurd, yet too specific to ignore without feeling reckless. Our son's room was the smallest in the house. A single window looked out onto the patio, where Mara hung laundry. The air inside smelled of baby cream, detergent, and the damp earth that rose from the fields every afternoon. A yellow lamp on the dresser threw a soft cone of light over the crib's edge. A cheap mobile with plastic stars swayed whenever air slipped under the door. Mariah didn't want to sleep at all. I convinced her we would take turns. From 9 until 2, she would sit in the chair beside the crib. From 2 until sunrise, I would. It felt like a reasonable compromise between her fear and my stubbornness. I told myself that vigilance was just another job, and I was good at jobs. When she handed the chair to me, her eyes were red from exhaustion, but she still whispered, "Don't close your eyes. Promise me." "I won't," I said, and meant it. I sat down, the chair legs creaking on the old floorboards. Efin slept with his fists half closed as if he was holding on to a dream. His breathing was steady, a tiny rise and fall that made the whole world seem manageable. I watched the rhythm until my shoulders loosened. Then the roof spoke. At first it was a light tapping, the kind you expect from a bird landing on tin. We had pigeons, grackles, even stray chickens that wandered onto roofs. Those sounds were quick scratch, flutter, gone. This wasn't quick. The steps stayed and repeated, short and measured, moving in a slow circle directly above the baby's room. I tilted my head, trying to place it. The taps paused, then resumed, as if whatever was up there had stopped to listen back. Just an animal, I muttered, because saying it out loud makes it feel like a fact, probably a cat. Above me, the footsteps continued, patient as someone counting. The tapping settled into my nerves the way a pebble settles into a shoe, small but impossible to forget. I stayed in the chair, eyes on Ififin, telling myself that if anything truly dangerous existed, it would announce itself with a roar, not with polite footsteps. The roof didn't agree. The steps shifted from circles to straight lines, back and forth over the same strip of tin. Tap, 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 pause, tap, tap. Each pass sounded slightly heavier, as if the thing above us was testing where the beams were strongest. Every time it paused, I held my breath without meaning to. When it resumed, I exhaled like I'd been forgiven. I stood and crossed the room with slow care, trying not to make the floorboards squeal. I checked the window latch again, pressing my thumb against the metal until it hurt. Locked. The curtain was tied. Nothing moved in the patio beyond the glass, except the faint sway of laundry lines. The footsteps continued. I pulled my phone from my pocket and tapped the screen for the time. 2:17 a.m. The light from the phone felt too bright, like a spotlight on my doubt. I set a timer for 5 minutes, not because it would do anything, but because it gave my mind something to hold on to. 5 minutes. If it's still there after 5 minutes, I'll go outside. I'll chase it off. I'll prove I'm in control. My son breathed unaware, and the scissors beside the crib gleamed dully, blades open like a warning. The perfume vial of holy water caught the lamplight and turned it into a thin sparkle. Objects, symbols, comforts. I looked at them and felt, for the first time, how desperate humans are to believe that simple things can argue with the night. A stronger sound came from the roof scrape, as if a claw or a heavy foot dragged against tin. I flinched despite myself. Ivan stirred, made a soft noise, then settled again. The mobile stars trembled slightly as if the room had inhaled. "It's a stray turkey," I whispered. "Someone's guajolote got loose." The phrase tasted wrong in my mouth. People in our town kept turkeys, yes, but turkeys made noise. They protested. They flapped and bumped and announced their presence to the entire street. The thing above us moved with quiet intention. The timer on my phone vibrated against my palm. 5 minutes had passed faster than I expected. The footsteps hadn't stopped once. I should have gone outside then. I know that now. I should have stepped into the patio, shined my phone light up at the roof, thrown a stone, yelled, done anything that said, "I'm awake and I'm watching." Instead, I made the mistake of thinking, one more minute just to be sure. That's how a lot of disasters begin, not with ignorance, but with a man bargaining for 60 seconds. The air in the room changed. It wasn't colder or warmer. It felt thicker, as if the oxygen had been replaced with something that sat heavy on the tongue. I swallowed and tasted metal. My eyes began to sting like I'd been staring into smoke. My head nodded once, tiny and involuntary, like a puppet whose strings had slackened. I jerked upright, annoyed at myself. I hadn't been yawning. I hadn't felt tired. My body had simply tried to shut down. I stood quickly, the chair scraping the floor, and paced in the narrow space between the crib and the dresser. The floorboards complained. The footsteps on the roof paused. A pause can be louder than sound. In the silence, I heard Mara's breathing from the other room. I heard my own pulse. I heard, somewhere outside, the distant bark of a dog that didn't sound playful. Then the roof steps resumed, slower now, as if the thing above us had settled more comfortably. I walked to the doorway and opened it a crack, letting colder air from the living room brush my face. I inhaled hard, trying to wake myself with it. The smell of the house soap, baby cream, damp earth was familiar, safe. I returned to the chair and sat down again, determined to outstare whatever wanted to outlast me. The moment my back touched the chair, Drowsiness hit like a hand pressed over my mouth. My eyelids became weights, not heavy from exhaustion, but heavy the way a magnet pulls on metal. I blinked hard, once, twice, forcing my eyes open. The room blurred at the edges anyway. The lamplight seemed to smear, leaving a tail behind every object. The mobile stars left faint streaks as they swayed. I slapped my cheeks. The sting helped for half a second, then the sleep pressed in again, patient and relentless. I dug my nails into my thigh through my jeans until pain sharpened the world. Still, the drowsiness didn't lift. It didn't behave like normal fatigue. It behaved like a command. Sleep can be a weapon when someone else holds the trigger. I stood again, swaying slightly, and reached for the holy water. My fingers fumbled with the perfume cap. I unscrewed it and dabbed a drop on my tongue, expecting bitterness. It tasted like nothing. I splashed a few drops onto my forehead. The coldness startled me, but only for a blink. The pressure behind my eyes returned, heavier. I looked at Ify then, and panic flared, sudden and hot. If I closed my eyes even for a second, I might not open them in time. I leaned over the crib and placed my palm flat on the mattress beside him, as if physical contact could anchor me to waking. The roof footsteps moved faster, tap tap, circling, impatient now. My vision tunneled. The lamp's yellow halo shrank until the corners of the room fell into shadow. Within that shadow, I thought I saw movement near the window curtain, something tall and thin, a shape that didn't match the furniture. I blinked, and it vanished, leaving only cloth and glass. "Geo," I whispered without knowing why, then realized I had called no one. My own voice sounded far away, like it came from the end of a hallway. The chair seemed to sink beneath me. My spine melted against the backrest. I tried to stand and found my legs slow, thick, as if the air had turned to mud around my knees. I remember lifting my chin and forcing my eyes to stay on my son's chest, counting the rises. 1, 2, 3. I remember thinking, I will not lose him to a story. Then the counting broke. The rises blurred into one long wave. The taps on the roof drifted as if they were happening in another house. My phone slipped from my hand and fell with a soft thud I barely noticed. Darkness didn't arrive like a curtain closing. It arrived like a hand turning off a switch. The last thing I felt was my own body surrendering, not to rest, but to something that had decided rest for me. Somewhere above, the roof steps stopped, as if satisfied. A sharp, violent bang on the window snapped the world back into place. My eyes snapped open, and for a heartbeat I didn't know where I was. The bang on the window had ripped me out of a blank fall, and my body answered with confusion, lungs dragging air, fingers gripping the chair arms, heart punching against my ribs. The lamp was still on. The room looked exactly as I had left it, which was what made the next detail feel impossible. Something stood between the crib and the wall, blocking the narrow space, as if it had always belonged there. At first, my mind refused to name it. My thoughts tried to save me by offering safer explanations. A shadow, a coat, Mara leaning over the baby. Then the thing shifted and feathers caught the lamplight in a dull shimmer. A guachalote stood beside my son. It was too big for the room. Its body filled the gap like a sack of wet cloth, heavy and settled. One wing hung half open, not in panic, but in balance, like it was bracing itself against an unseen current. Its head bobbed forward in short, precise motions, always aimed at the same place, the center of Ivan's chest. Turkeys in our town were loud. They complained. They flapped and stumbled and made fools of themselves. This one didn't. It moved with quiet intention, as if noise was beneath it. I flicked my eyes to the window. The curtain was pushed outward, ballooned by night air. The latch hung down, open. The frame trembled slightly, like it had been struck hard enough to wake me. I did not remember unlatching it. I did not remember standing. I did not remember touching the curtain. But the window was open anyway, and the air pouring in carried the smell of wet earth and something else dry, ancient, like dust trapped for years behind sealed boards. I forced myself up from the chair. The guachalote reacted instantly. It spread its wings wider, feathers whispering against the crib rail, and for a split second it turned its head toward me. The lamplight struck its face, and my stomach went cold. Beneath the feather line I saw skin wrinkled and drawn tight, almost human in texture, as if someone had tried to make a bird out of an old woman's hands. Its eyes were wrong too, not the blank eyes of livestock. They looked back with recognition, like it knew my name and didn't need to speak it. I took one step forward, arms lifting without a plan. I didn't have a weapon, only panic and a father's instinct to get between danger and his child. The guajolote moved first. It shoved toward the window with one powerful beat, its body somehow fitting through the opening that had seemed too small. The curtain snapped aside. A fine dust lifted and hung in the lamplight like ash. The frame rattled as it pushed through, and then it was outside, wings striking the air once heavy and gone. The window stayed open, breathing cold into the room. For half a second, I stood staring at the empty night, waiting for the sound of it landing somewhere else, waiting for the roof footsteps to return, waiting for reality to pick one shape and stay in it. Nothing. I turned to the crib. Forfin lay swaddled as before, his head turned slightly, his mouth parted, but the color of his skin had changed. Under the yellow lamp he looked drained, pale in a way that didn't belong to sleep. His lips had a faint bluish tint that made my throat close. "No," I whispered, and the word came out like a broken breath. I reached into the crib and touched his cheek, cold. Not cool from the air, cold like stone. I pressed 2 fingers under his nose, desperate for any hint of warm breath. Nothing. My hands shook as I pulled the blanket away from his chest. Just below the sternum, perfectly centered, was a dot of red the size of a pinhead. Clean, precise, fresh, as if placed there on purpose. The sight of that tiny mark hit me harder than any blood would have, because it felt deliberate. It felt intelligent. The smallest wound can empty a life. I lifted him quickly, holding him against my shoulder, trying to trick my body into believing the familiar posture would bring the familiar outcome. His head lolled without resistance. His weight felt wrong, too light, as if something essential had been drained away, and the skin was only a wrapper left behind. "Mara," I shouted, voice cracking. "Mara, wake up." She appeared in the doorway with her hair loose and her eyes already wide, the way mothers wake when something is wrong, even before they know why. She crossed the room, hands out, then froze when she saw Evan's face. "What happened?" she asked, barely audible. "Daniel, what did you do?" "I didn't." My mouth failed. I pointed at the open window, at the curtain lifting in the wind. I showed her the red dot on Ivan's chest. My hands shook so badly, my fingers couldn't hold the blanket back. Mara took him from my arms and pressed her ear to his mouth. She rubbed his hands, then his feet hard, as if friction could summon life. When she found the puncture mark, she made a small choking noise that didn't sound like a word in any language. The scissors by the crib were still open, but they no longer formed a perfect cross. One blade had shifted as if nudged aside. The perfume vial of holy water lay on its side on the dresser, cap loose, leaving a thin, wet trail that glinted under the lamp. Mara began to wail, a raw sound that tore through the house and out into the street. I ran into the hallway and hammered on our neighbor's door until my knuckles burned. "Señor Aimé," I shouted, "help me, my baby isn't breathing." Aimé lived 2 houses down and sometimes worked nights at the highway clinic. He opened his door still half asleep, saw my face, and snapped awake. He followed me without questions. In our bedroom, Mara clutched Ivan to her chest, like she could fuse them back together. Aimé took the baby, laid him carefully on the bed, and began compressions with 2 fingers, counting under his breath. He tilted Iverson's head, checked the mouth, blew tiny breaths, watched for any sign. I hovered beside him, useless, hands clenched so tight my nails cut my palms. I wanted to scream at the world to return what it had stolen. I wanted to bargain with anything listening, but the room contained only Aimé's calm counting, Mara's sobs, and the steady wind pushing against the open curtain. After long minutes, Aimé slowed, then stopped. He checked again, as if repetition might change the answer. Finally, he looked at me, his eyes wet but steady. "I'm sorry," he said. "He's gone." Mara collapsed to the floor. Her body folded as if her bones had been removed. I stayed standing because if I bent my knees, I was afraid I'd never stand again. I stared at the tiny puncture on my son's chest, the single dot that had done what fists and knives could not. People began to arrive, drawn by Mara's cry and the urgency in my voice. They filled our living room in whispers and prayers. Some crossed themselves. Some avoided looking at me. A few looked straight at me, and in their eyes I saw the verdict forming. "Did you fall asleep?" one woman asked, not cruelly but like someone inspecting a broken tool. I tried to answer and could only nod. Shame burned through grief, hot and immediate. Another voice, older, softer, said, "It comes when the watcher sleeps." Dualetti stepped into the doorway as if the words had summoned her. She didn't hurry to comfort Mara. She looked at the window, the shifted scissors, the spilled holy water, and then at me. "Your eyes are the weakest part of the house," she said. "Not the door, not the latch, your eyes." I wanted to tell her about the sleep, the way it had pressed on me like hands. I wanted to say I hadn't chosen it, but a promise is a promise, and I had promised Mara. In the center of the room, with my son on the bed and the lamp still glowing, excuses felt like lies. Outside, dawn began to pale the sky. Birds called in the fields. Normal sounds returned as if the world had decided nothing important had happened. Someone finally closed the window and tied the curtain tight. Someone picked up the perfume vial and set it upright, as if standing it up could undo what had occurred. The scissors remained open, but the cross they were meant to form looked imperfect now, tilted like a symbol that had been mocked. Dualetti leaned close enough that only I could hear her next words. "It didn't need to break in," she whispered. "You opened the way when you stopped watching." I flinched. "I didn't open. You slept," she said, and the word was final, and it noticed. I looked up at the ceiling, at the boards between us and the roof. For a moment there was only silence. Then, directly above the baby's room, a slow tapping began again, measured footsteps circling on tin, as patient as someone returning to check their work. No one else seemed to hear it, or maybe they pretended not to. I stood very still, listening, and realized the most terrifying thing of all. The sound wasn't searching anymore. It was staying. We buried Ifevan on a day so bright, it felt cruel. The priest spoke about angels while the sun burned the weeds behind the cemetery wall. Mara's hand stayed clenched around a rosary until the beads left dents in her skin. When the last shovel of earth fell, she didn't cry. She went silent, and that silence moved into our house like a second tenant. After that, I stopped sleeping. At first, I told myself it was grief. Then I admitted the uglier reason. I was afraid that if I slept, the thing that had climbed our roof would come back for the only target left. Mara slept in short bursts, waking to every creak. Some nights, she looked at me and asked, quietly, "When did you close your eyes?" She didn't ask like a wife, she asked like a judge. We talked less and less, as if words might reopen the puncture in the center of our lives. We left the town a few weeks later, chasing streetlights and neighbors, close enough to hear if we screamed. It didn't matter. Fear doesn't need distance, it only needs a moment. Years passed. My body learned to function on thin sleep, the way you learn to work with a splinter you can't remove. Then my father died and I had to return for the funeral. Maria refused to come. She said she couldn't breathe that air again. I went alone. Dualetti found me outside the church afterward, older and smaller, eyes still sharp. She studied my face and said, "You still don't sleep." "How do you know?" I asked. "Because you look like a man who's been on watch for years," she replied, and glanced up at the roof tiles as if listening. The words I'd kept locked up broke loose. "It made me sleep," I said. I fought it. I wasn't tired, it just pressed me down. Dualetti's mouth tightened with a tired certainty. "That's how it works," she said. "It doesn't need your permission, it needs your eyelids." I wanted an explanation that sounded like medicine. Instead, I got folklore spoken like law. She told me what no one had said in front of Mara, as if the truth would have finished her off. "The scissors and the holy water aren't shields," she said. "They're seconds. The blades in a cross make it hesitate. The water stings it. But the sting only matters if someone is awake to use the pause. If the watcher sleeps, the house is already open." My throat tightened. So it was always my fault. Dualetti shook her head once. "In our town, a newborn is the bait," she said softly. The real meal is the moment you stop looking. It comes for the promise you made, because promises are easier to drink than blood. She leaned closer, her breath smelling of coffee and old smoke. If you ever hear steps on a roof again, she whispered, don't waste time hunting what's up there. Look at the person you love and make sure they're still breathing. The bruja doesn't come to be seen. It comes to be forgotten for 1 second. She turned to leave. I stood there under the church's shadow, trying to decide whether the world had become clearer or worse. Above us, a soft tapping began 3 steps, a pause, 3 steps circling on the roof tiles, slow and patient. Duia. Letty didn't look up. She kept walking. I did look up and saw nothing but pale morning sky. Then, right behind my ear, a voice like a woman forcing a bird's throat whispered, almost fondly, now you're watching.